The Pocket family were adrift in dreams, nestled upon the vast, flat expanse of the kitchen windowsill. The high barricades of boxes piled on the counter sheltered their tiny forms from the grand world of the humans. Here, among a landscape of cloths and cleaning products, they had found for themselves a place of unlikely, profound comfort. Mr. and Mrs. Pocket, known affectionately to their children as Pa and Ma, lay side by side. Their bodies burrowed deep into the soft, yellow dunes of a dusting cloth. Ma's breath was a gentle snore, and with every exhale, the yellow fabric would rise and fall like a small flag in a gentle breeze. Beside her, Pa slept soundly, an expression of pure peace and contentment upon his face. Nearby, the Pocket children, Matilda and Joe, slept just as soundly, having made their beds within the cloud-like billows of a feather duster. It was so large and fluffy that it was like sleeping upon a genuine cloud. Of course, the family hadn't always slept on the kitchen windowsill, amongst the bottles and cloths. For years, their true home had been a secret set of bedrooms hidden in an old tissue box at the back of a kitchen cupboard. There, they had lived in blissful solitude for many years, rarely ever glimpsing the elderly couple who owned the place, or indeed any humans at all. But last month, a moving van had arrived. Every cupboard was cleared out, including theirs, as the old couple packed everything into cavernous cardboard boxes. All at once, the Pocket family had lost their ancestral home. Yet they were not overly worried. They saw it instead as an opportunity for adventure and exploration, an exciting new chapter in their family story. First, they decided on a temporary move to the kitchen windowsill while the new human family settled in. It was Pa who chose the windowsill. He thought it might be useful to sleep beside the window and be woken by the natural daylight. This way, they would all be awake early, long before the humans. They would have the house to themselves for a few hours. They could talk and eat freely, and even wash in the kitchen sink. It would also give them time to move into one of their countless tiny hideouts before the humans were up and about. And that's exactly what the Pockets had been doing over the past month. They observed the new homeowners from behind boxes, underneath furniture, and through cracks in the skirting board. Like the previous residents, this new family was also composed of two: the Grangers, a mother in her early 30s and a very smiley 5-year-old daughter. The Grangers had many friends, kind people who had spent the last month helping to move furniture, paint walls, and unpack various new objects. According to Matilda Pocket, this was proof that the Grangers were nice people. They must be, she reasoned, to have so many friends willing to help them out. The rest of the Pocket family agreed. They'd overheard conversations between the mother and daughter. The Grangers seemed to be some of the most kind and gentle humans the Pockets had ever encountered. At bedtime, the mother would sit at the edge of her daughter's bed, reading stories until the girl fell asleep. Then the mother would tuck her into the bed sheets, kiss her forehead, and tiptoe softly out of the room. The Pocket children were often a secret audience for these bedtime stories. Matilda and Joe would sit comfortably on a nearby shelf, resting against the books, and loved to listen to these soothing tales. Afterward, they would return to the kitchen windowsill, climb into the cloud-like feather duster, and fall asleep. Although their stay on the windowsill was meant to be temporary, it had actually worked out rather well for them. In many ways, the last month had felt like an extended family holiday. The windowsill was the ideal vacation spot. They had dined like royalty on takeaways left on the kitchen counter, and they'd enjoyed access to a constant supply of fresh water from the taps. Their bedding might have been unconventional, but it was as soft and comfortable as the sheets in any five-star hotel. Ma and Pa had grown particularly fond of their velvety dusting cloth with its scents of lemon and lavender. But they all agreed that the best thing about their new home on the windowsill was the very reason Pa had suggested it in the first place: the sheer beauty of the light radiating through the window. It was particularly beautiful now, at dawn, as the sun began to rise and soft light dispersed through the glass. It cast a golden sheen across the family's sleepy faces, warming their skin with its gentle touch. Across the sill, each member of the family began to stir. They shuffled in their bedding and stretched their arms and legs. Joe was the first to get up. He was the tallest of the bunch. Joe yawned happily, stretching his arms above his head. Then he reached down towards his toes, feeling the stretch through his back and legs. Finally, he sat down cross-legged to admire the sunrise through the kitchen window. It was the kind of moment that anyone would appreciate, watching the sun rise through a clear blue sky. But having spent a lifetime waking in the back of a dark cupboard, Joe particularly appreciated this view. So did the rest of the Pockets, who soon came to sit beside him. Recently, this had become their morning ritual. They would climb out of bed, sit facing the glass, and look out at the sunrise together. They watched as the massive orb of golden light slowly inched upwards in the sky, gradually revealing the natural beauty at the back of the house. There was a rectangular lawn, bordered by rose beds, with a stone fountain at its center. Beyond the grass stood a typical wooden shed, painted the same chestnut red as the fence that enclosed the space. To human eyes, it seemed like an attractive yet ordinary garden. But the tiny people on the windowsill saw it differently. Through their eyes, everything was elevated in size and grandeur. The garden became a kingdom, protected by the soaring fences that stretched up towards the sky. The shed was like a massive royal palace, a vision of chestnut-red magnificence shimmering in the sunlight. And in front of the palace, there were the royal gardens, a vast landscape of emerald countryside, flanked on either side by rose bushes as tall as trees. They looked like an enchanted forest, its canopy sprinkled with ruby-like blooms. And what stood out above all else was the garden's most recent addition, the ivory fountain at its center. At the top, water spilled from the tip of a beautiful stone pineapple, cascading downwards into a large round basin. This basin allowed the water to spill over its sides, flowing into an even larger pool below. It was a feast for the eyes. For the Pockets, this splendid fountain looked enormous, like an Egyptian pyramid. This morning, the Pockets sat by the window and admired the fountain, meditating on its sound. To human ears, it was a calm, trickling sound. But to the Pockets, it was a series of magnificent, gushing waterfalls. The fountain was like their very own Niagara Falls right outside the window. As the sun rose, patterns of light bounced on the water, resembling sparkling diamonds. The sight was so beautiful that Pa felt inspired. Turning to his wife and children, he said that even after they leave the windowsill, he hoped they would return here often. Once the sun had risen, the family slipped down from the sill one by one, making their way past the kitchen sink. They often had showers in the sink, taking it in turns to climb down the plug chain and stand beneath the dripping tap. There was nothing quite like that cool water to rouse the senses in the morning. But today they were just passing by. There was no need for an invigorating wash right now. With the prospect of adventure ahead, The Pockets were energized and more cheerful than ever. The humans had settled down, with their furniture in place and the walls freshly painted. So now it was time for the Pockets to explore and find a new place to call home. Over the past few weeks, they had all spent a lot of time thinking about where they might like to live. Each member of the family had a preferred place in mind. Ma and Pa were great believers in fairness and equality, so they had decided that each person's choice would be looked at and considered. The location of their next home would be chosen by a family vote. The first person to showcase his choice was Pa. This was why he was leading the way now. Protruding from his backpack were 2 repurposed toothpicks. These were his walking sticks, which were very handy when crossing uneven terrain. The Pockets were experienced explorers, so everyone had their own walking sticks and backpacks filled with equipment. These were things collected over the years, repurposed to form an effective adventurer's kit. The Pockets relied on these tools whenever they headed out. For instance, their climbing ropes were a combination of knotted string, safety pins, and picture hooks. Thanks to these ropes, they had managed to scale every surface, no matter how tall or wide, smooth or rocky. Right now, the Pockets resembled a group of expert hikers, but instead of striding through the countryside, they were crossing marble worktops. As they journeyed through the kitchen, they weaved in and out of spice racks and sugar bowls. Then, after traversing the perimeter of the sink, they stepped onto the electric oven top. It was as smooth as an ice rink, so they held hands, forming a chain to stay upright. Their movements became smooth and effortless, and they glided across the glassy surface like a professional ice skating team. This felt wonderful, more like flying than walking. Everyone was delighted when Pa turned around at the cooker's edge and led them back out onto the glass. They twisted and twirled, moving so gracefully that you'd think they were one person, not 4. All of the Pockets beamed from ear to ear, even as they left the cooker and made their way towards Pa's chosen place. They had almost arrived now. They pulled out their climbing ropes and ascended the microwave, with Pa leading the way. Then, once they were all standing on top of the microwave, Pa threw his rope upwards. It went up through a rectangular gap in the base of the cupboard above them. Pulling on the rope, Pa checked that the picture hook at the other end was fixed firmly into place. Then he climbed up the rope until he was inside the cupboard and waited for the others to join him. For the rest of the family, this cupboard seemed a little unusual. It was the first time they had seen one with a giant mechanical device inside. "This is the human's boiler," Pa explained. "It provides the heat that keeps the house nice and warm." He led them behind the machine to a spot where bowls of cotton wool had been laid out like a sofa and chairs. At Pa's suggestion, the family sat down, their tiny bodies sinking into the snug fabric of the cotton wool. Instantly, they were struck by the coziness of this place and the blanket of warm air around the boiler. It was a lovely, relaxing spot, the kind of place where one might sit and read a book, especially on days when it's cold and wet outside. When Pa brought out a tray of tiny foil mugs filled with hot chocolate, it felt even more like home. As he served them, he explained that all it takes is a speck of cocoa dust, a drop of water from the nearby tap, and a minute beside the boiler. Then there's enough hot chocolate for the whole family. The Pockets were impressed. The hot chocolate tasted so utterly delicious. It was creamy and milky, combining the flavors of luxurious dark chocolate with a hint of sweet mint. And they were excited about the place too, picturing what it might become once decorated and furnished. They imagined nights full of chit-chat and comfort, and this luxurious hot cocoa. and in the morning, they could climb down into the kitchen, making a beeline for the windowsill and its spectacular view. How wonderful it would be, sitting together every morning to admire the beauty of the waking world. The whole family were enthralled by this warm and cozy space. But once the cups were empty, they were ready to journey on. Ma led the group now. She threw the climbing rope downwards, catching the hook on the leg of a kitchen chair. Using a toothpick, she secured herself to the rope. Then, with her arms raised and a look of childlike mischief on her face, she zip-wired down the rope. She landed effortlessly on the kitchen floor. The rest of the family soon followed. They all smiled as they glided down, exhilarated by the ride. Then they walked on across the smooth floor and below the towering height of the kitchen table. Soon, they arrived at a huge wooden sideboard. This was a new piece of furniture bought by the Grangers. It was a beautiful light pine that perfectly matched the table and chairs beside it. The sideboard added a much-needed touch of brightness to the room. Below, there were 3 cupboards, their doors paned with frosted glass. Ma explained that the middle cupboard was their destination. Then, she planted her toothpick down into the floor and vaulted forward through the air, disappearing through a gap in the cupboard door. The other pockets followed her lead until the entire family were standing inside. Led by Ma, they weaved their way around mountains of fine bone china. There were plates, bowls, teacups, and saucers. Some were so smooth and delicate that they were surely reserved for special occasions only. And some of the plates were decorated with hand-painted artwork of such beauty that Ma thought they belonged in a museum or gallery. Other items were plain in design, like the mounds of teacups. Their curved surfaces were so well polished that they were like mirrors. Matilda was particularly amused by her reflection. She was also surprised by how much she looked like a real explorer. Seeing herself like this, she felt quite proud, both of herself and her family. Matilda also felt a little braver than she had felt before. Although she was the youngest and smallest in the family, she felt she could stand and walk a bit taller now, with the confidence of an intrepid adventurer. This moment was just one of many happy surprises for Matilda. As she turned a corner and reached the back of the shelf, a table came into view. Ma had prepared everything. The table itself was made from a single bottle top, and on its surface sat a giant loop of cereal. It was a breakfast unlike any the Pockets had seen before. This single piece of cereal looked like a giant donut of chocolatey, honey-sweet loveliness, and it was so large it could feed the Pockets for a fortnight. As they looked on in wonder, Ma explained her discovery. It seemed that the little human girl ate cereal for breakfast every day. She always ate in the chair right beside this cupboard, and as she was rather a messy eater, she scattered morsels of delicious food everywhere. So, right beside this cupboard, there was an endless supply of delicious food, and not only at breakfast time, but at lunch and dinner too. The Pockets sat down around the table, their bellies rumbling at the sight and smell of the food. Then, without another word, they all tucked in, savoring the taste of the sweet, crunchy cereal. "I think we could be very happy here," declared Matilda as she chewed the last of her cereal. "And it's much lighter than the last cupboard," said Pa. The others nodded in agreement. The family relaxed, feeling utterly satisfied after their sweet, hearty breakfast. Once more, they began to daydream, picturing what it might be like to live here. Though it was not as warm as Pa's spot in the boiler cupboard, it felt just as comfortable and homely in here. and the thought of eating food like this each and every day was very tempting indeed. Joe could almost move in right now. But later, when the pockets had left the cupboard, Joe remembered that it was his turn to act as group leader. He sprang into action, leading the group back across the kitchen floor. Daylight filled the kitchen now. It was mellow and golden, like the light at sunrise, but visibly brighter. In some places, the floor was speckled with patterns of sunshine reflected through the window. The family walked through one such pattern, finding themselves suddenly awash in gorgeous, powerful sunlight. Beneath their feet, the bamboo floor became sand-like in appearance, and in the background, they could hear the ever-flowing water of the fountain outside, which sounded like the waves of a vast ocean. It was as if the family had been transported thousands of miles away to some exotic beach destination. Indeed, by the time they exited this tropical little spot, the tiny family were positively glowing. As they prepared to traverse the fluffy hallway carpet, their moods were carefree and relaxed. Perhaps this was why their walk over the creamy carpet felt so effortless. But even so, it was a rather lengthy journey, and not the easiest of terrains to cross. It was times like these that the family were especially grateful to be together. They all held hands as they walked among the thick, velvety carpet fibers, supporting each other just as they did before. This particular carpet had only recently been laid, and it was the family's first crossing. Ma was simply awestruck at its softness and bounciness, and everyone appreciated that new carpet smell. It stayed with them all throughout their journey, lingering on their clothes as they stepped through another open doorway and into the living room. Of all the rooms in the house, this one was perhaps the most altered by the new homeowners. Gone was the burgundy carpet that Ma had never liked, and in its place was a floor of polished mahogany. The old wallpaper had been replaced with sun-soaked terracotta paint. Framed artwork decorated the walls, displaying scenes from nature. Next to them were simpler pieces, most likely drawn by the Granger child. In the middle of the room sat a massive leather sofa. It was a comfy spot for viewing the TV that was directly opposite, raised high on the wall. This was, without a doubt, the biggest screen that the family had ever encountered. Matilda gasped at the sight of it, while her parents chuckled quietly. It was hardly surprising that their son would choose such a place. Living beside a giant cinema screen would be a dream come true for Joe. But as the family followed Joe across the glossy floorboards, then up onto the coffee table, they soon realized that their assumptions were wrong. Joe wasn't leading them to the sofa, to a crevice in the cushions which offered a view of the screen. Instead, he took them across the coffee table to a sight far more impressive than the television. There, in the center of the table, sat a large rectangular fish tank, teeming with life. Joe beamed. He looked like a proud treasure hunter showing off his findings. Then he strolled across the table towards the tank and invited his family to sit down within the indentation of a decorative panel on the table. It was a great spot for the pockets. This little space was deep enough for them to remain hidden and slanted at the perfect angle to take in the tank. As the family sat side by side, they examined the marine and plant life in the vast aquarium. There were chunks of driftwood twisting beautifully in different directions, with fish of every color fluttering through the branches. Even the tiniest fish seemed enormous, and each one had its own unique mixture of colors and patterns. One fish in particular was a striking shade of red and had large, petal-like fins. Joe explained that he had named this fish Rose. In part, this was because of her color, which was the same ruby red as the roses in the garden. And the way she moved also reminded him of rose petals. Her movements were so smooth and flowing. She was like a petal floating through the water. For the third time today, the family were impressed. They all thought it might be quite marvelous to move to such a place. Pa, in particular, had often dreamt of living beside the water. If they moved here, the family would have their own private ocean, a source of constant beauty and entertainment. And besides, it wouldn't be so difficult to set up their furniture beneath the nearby sofa leg, or perhaps in one of the table drawers below. But Pa was soon pulled from his daydreams. Matilda stood up, ready to show off her own pick of locations before the family cast their votes. Striding forward with confidence, she abseiled down the coffee table, landing softly on the smooth mahogany floor. Then she turned, though not towards the hallway as the others expected. Instead, she guided the family further into the living room. They went past the coffee table and around the back of the sofa. Only Matilda had visited this spot, which was why she couldn't resist looking back at her family to flash a knowing smile. As she knew what was just around the corner, she found it difficult to contain her delight. And very soon, the rest of her family were equally delighted. Right there, against the living room wall, was the little girl's dollhouse. It was so tall that its roof nearly reached the arm of the sofa. The dollhouse opened out to reveal 3 floors of various rooms, connected by stairs at each level and a lift at the side. There was a kitchen and living room on the ground floor, and a dining room and bathroom above. On the top floor, there were the bedrooms. One was larger, with a double bed at its center, and there were also 2 smaller rooms with single beds. Like every room in the house, the bedrooms were beautifully decorated and furnished with the most modern and stylish pieces. For some time, the Pockets stood there in silence, taking in the sight of this wonderful mansion. Like the other places they had seen in their travels today, it felt like home. But this place actually looked like home too. There was no longer any need to imagine furniture and decor, because it already looked better than anything they could have planned. It was a dream come true to each and every one of them. So, it was no surprise that Matilda's pick won the vote. The Pockets decided on the dollhouse even before Matilda pointed out the tiny remote-controlled car parked beside the house. They could use this to travel everywhere, revisiting the places they'd seen today, as well as plenty of new destinations. Whenever the mood struck, they might visit the fish tank or the fountain, or stop to sunbathe on the kitchen floor. They could fill the car boot with cereal loops, cocoa, and various other delicacies before returning home to their very own dining room. And when it was time to go to sleep, Matilda and Joe could climb into their very own beds. Here, they would listen to a soothing bedtime story read by their parents. And then, when Matilda and Joe were fast asleep, Ma and Pa would tiptoe out of the room, leaving the children to dream of new adventures.